Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. Thank you for joining us. I am Rosalia Scalia, the host, and tonight we bring you three exciting writers. There's McBain-Stephens, Elisabeth Blair, and Sean Murphy, who all have forthcoming books with Unsolicited Press. Elizabeth, who is widely published, hails from Canada, is a poet, an editor, and a workshop leader. Jennifer from Iowa is the author of 15 chapbooks and 5 full-length poetry collections. And Sean from Shenandoah directs storytelling initiative at Shenandoah University. He writes poetry and fiction. And thank you all for joining us. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, which means it's going to be Elizabeth, Jennifer, and Sean. Each is going to read from their forthcoming works, and then we're going to follow it with a Q&A. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, just post them underneath the reading and we will see them. So thank you for joining us, and let's go. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my book is not forthcoming. It's past coming. It came out in 2022 with Unsolicited Press. So, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do this reading. And my book is called Because God Loves the Wasp. I don't actually have it in my hands because I'm traveling, but I have the PDF, so I can't show you the pretty cover. But it's a pretty cover for a dark book. It's a book about the troubled teen industry and my experience in it in the 1990s. So quick trigger warning for anyone. This is going to involve the troubled teen industry being taken forcibly away and put into an abusive situation with adults who are taking advantage of their roles as caregivers. So I wrote this book as a memoir. It's a poetry memoir, but it's also a protest. I'm sort of trying to add my voice to the voices of others like Paris Hilton, who's been very prominently in the news. We actually went to one of the same facilities the same year, the same like few months around the same time. So I'm really glad to be able to have my voice in the fray here. So I'm going to read a few pages from this book. I'm going to read the first few pages from the very beginning to introduce you to it, and then I'll do a few selections. Okay, so something that kids often have happen to them when their parents choose to send them to these facilities is they get their parents are told to hire escorts who are basically muscly men who come and wake the child up in their room in the middle of the night and come and get them. So and take them away. So that's what this is about. Your blanket is the shell of an egg. You, young, raw, you're standing on it. The man with the handcuffs is generous. He gives you time. He helps, gets oxygen to your brain, makes your breast heave. A bird on a stoop, on its back, in shock. Get in the man's truck. Still not easy to read. A bone tucked in weeds, you breathe through your hair. A bean, you're obedient, plucked from the pod, shapely on the plate. Soon you'll deliver your babies, your voice, your testimony, into their fields, then watch them be plowed under from the shelter of a ditch. They'll pay you in nightmares for as long as you live. It's helpful. It's love. You'll see. When you're older, if you make it. For now, darkness, child locks. I'm next going to read another difficult poem, not about myself, what happened to me. I was sent to 2 different facilities. The first one was a 6-week boot camp type facility where you're supposed to sort of break the child so that they'll obey. It's kind of worse in some ways and better in other ways than the longer term facilities that they would send the kids to. So I was there first, and this is something that I witnessed. You only speak when spoken to by the staff, but the English boy speaks at will. He laughs, pulls his pants down, and shits in the mess tent. You look at the grain in the rough wooden bench. He kicks as they tackle him to the ground, and all the while, as they swear and shout and he fights, comes his laughter, making ripples in your eyes. They put him in a sleeping bag, wrap a tarp around it, tie it with rope, then leave him on the ground for days on display in March in the mountains and many feet of snow. They call it a burrito. Let him laugh, they say. Let him wiggle and roll. We were not killed. I am not ungrateful. I am not ungrateful. Haven't gotten the knack of reading these things without feeling it. Page 34. Okay. The last one I'm going to read is, so we had to do these 3-hour long, they called them rap sessions. The facilities that I was sent to were based on the Synanon cult, which was a mid-century cult, very culty cult, all the classic cult stuff. And some of the followers went away and started up these schools. They called them schools, their facilities. And brought all their culty stuff with them. So we would have to do these 3-hour long, multiple times a week, these 3-hour long group sessions that were really messed up in so many ways. It's very abusive, verbally, emotionally. But one of the weird ways was that you always had to produce something. You had to show that you were doing your work. So you always had to like make some connection or like confess something, or, you know, we were like 14, 15-year-old kids. So you got really good at like being what they wanted you to be, making shit up basically, because you hadn't even lived enough life for all the confessions they wanted to ook out of you. So this last poem I'll read is about one of those 3-hour sessions. Your body appears seated on a couch. On either side of your head, a conch shell and an empty space, respectively. What does the shell say? Reveal the noise to us. You make a mouth shape and do the noise as it is, benign, insignificant. We don't believe this is all. Show us more. You look and find that you can lift the conch's skirt. You reveal the ankles and legs of the noise. But we know that's not all. They're impatient now. You'd best feed their mustached 40-something mouths. The children in the circle also pull at the wires. Maybe they'll be kind. Maybe they'll pull hard. You can't know. You break the conch over your knee and make your body into a shell. Crying from the pain of condensing and growing hard, you become a vessel, a mouth that is now an ear. We know there's more than one shell. You pause, uncertain now. You can't immediately come up with what they want. There is no other shell, you say, just empty space. You're defiant now and safe in logic and facts. But The scene blurs as the volume becomes a storm. You're wormy, crouching, searching among the rubble on the floor for another, perhaps a baby, shell. Here, a piece of fuzz whose shape resembles a snail. You present it to the storm, hold it up from where you kneel, your eyes flush with salt, the room misty with spittle and rage from the mustached spine and the children beside him. You scream, here's the shell you said would be here. It's in the shape of a vulva and means me being touched by a boy and my touching him and all the shame. The storm stops. Wings extend, wrap around you. You cry with relief. You've performed well. There will be more 3 times a week. But today you've passed. For now, at least, you'll be permitted to speak and be spoken to. Permitted to be. I don't know if that fridge is too loud for y'all. The storm wants specific things. You, poet, can be convincing. Spare no valuable time or energy for those who cannot proceed with the academic rigor, dramatic skill, and creativity necessary. Tell no one. Be absolutely alone, but be. And if any of that was confusing, it was on purpose because those sessions would be so nonsensical that I wanted to take the reader into, I wanted to embody that nonsensicalness, the absolute loss of bearings and trying to find something to say. So thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. What powerful reading. Afterwards, we'll have a Q&A where we could talk about everyone's readings. So Jennifer, what would you like to tell us about your forthcoming book or your current book?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosalia, and thank you, Elisabeth, for sharing your powerful poems. Those were really, really strong and effective and emotional, and I'm excited to talk more about them at the end. So my book of poetry, Pool Parties, came out at the end of 2023, and these poems mostly have content about, some COVID poems, pop culture, poems about feeling isolated, also some nature poems and found crystal poems that I wrote inspired from a book on crystals. So there's some found poetry in here. So yeah, so there's a lot of variety. So I'm just gonna read probably like 4 or 5. I'll keep an eye on the time because I know that's important. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here and thanks everybody. Okay, I'm gonna take off my glasses because I'm at that age now. Okay. This is for my daughter. Onward, Gemini. Daughter is a light puffy jacket, contains a forest inside. She flops, she tosses schoolery, a different kind of note. Redecorates with candles, laughs at 5-second videos. Daughter scamps and skates. She Daisy Dukes. Loses green Viking volleyball shorts. Flattens warm pita. Filters the like show. Size 10 shoe already. Giraffe daughter teeters between flat and heel. Ponytail and bun. Brown-eyed Claricel. Holds a candle for cartoons. Maybe a too long hug devastates the world. Opinions fall off the roof. No earth below her feet. Rooms I would build to see the vulnerable me, to honor short-haired dogs who are gone, hi-fi to tune minimum wage out, lo-fi to turn nostalgia on, to get slippery with a body, to ignore mess, to give real compliments, to breathe 5 breaths in downward dog, to wipe off muddy boots from a garden that burned, to Red Bull refresh, to say I love you, to roast middle school field trips, to draw future brain maps, to fight like we mean it, to build on additional rooms to deal with compartmentalization issues, to not overschedule, color code, nap so much, shower so little, stare at the wall, wonder what to do next, not put on a dress just for Zoom, not wonder about the future or cry, to not feel despair, to not touch you, to not miss you, to not think about your death, to not feel so alone in a room. This next poem is my poem about climate change. The play starts late, and I'm still trying to save Tasmanian devils from themselves. I drown in plastic bags, and we always knew they were such murderers. One character wears reused cotton, but a member of the 1% waits in the wings, all white beard, like a tiny god. Dreams of producing nanoplastics. His vanity plate says, "Because I can." One character asks, "Where have all the birds gone?" A month of record rain and giant squirrels have eaten all of the roots away. The dirt does not stay in the ground. Brad Pitt builds one more house for a family dressed in tie-dye. A neon green snowmobile wrecks Colorado. A slaughtered calf is red and white like Madonna's skin. How many working poor groan into their day? The prologue. A friend once asked, why give secrets away in the prologue? Why hold details back from the book? Greenland's first line, how cold is this polar vortex? The director's attention glued to a GoPro of awesome. The ice sheets in this theater are melting, and this makes the audience cry. Everyone checks their phones. If this theater melted at once, that would raise sea levels all at once 7 meters. People's pearls float away. The show posters float for rats. Okay, this next poem is called Pool Parties number 2. If you had thrown me that life preserver or beverage cart. I wrote a bunch of poems all called Pool Parties when I lived in Virginia, and I went to these parties at this artist collective I think it was in Fairfax, Virginia, because I was trying to meet new people, and I met, poets and artists there, and they just had great exhibits, and one of them was all of this art about pool parties. I didn't know how to shake myself out of playing with this brass band, of dissolving small and out of my goddamn mind. An over-under fraction is equal to a difference in gorgeousness. Play it both ways, rub and burn. Cramp up, say stop. Offer a mild shock if you want it. My correspondent studied strange beasts. I took it from her. The details on automatic pilot, a Dixie beer, a pickup, my breath like chicory stripped between windows, Finger the ice and let's go. A dead Czech actor is like a funeral, terrible and beautiful. I don't want to stop. Can't stop. So how are we doing on time? Okay.
We have some time.
Okay, so maybe I'll read 2 more.
Sure.
Okay. Notes on an episode of Midnight Gospel. All the names have been changed. Trenchnia is a warrior in the world of death that she entered by mistake. She carries a rose in her mouth that absorbs blood, turns into a sword when she needs to fight a beast. Her horse looks like a robot horse, but breathes air and loyalty. The blonde boy follows her around. Across the city, a demon spins in the body of a man until the man is split in 2. Sometimes the man is upside down and spins on his head. Trenchnia says, "You have to forgive. You have to listen." The blood absorbs into her and she uses that to fight the demon. She saves her love at the end and they kiss and she is taller than him. But then the demon is rebirthed. It covers the world in green slime and hate and murders everything in the city. The world gets swallowed up in green light and everyone is enlightened in their death and in their love. But we miss Trenchnia. Okay, I'll just read this last one. It's called Pool Parties 5 Photo Op. I walked to the pool party I wasn't invited to. Greta Garbo is there, talking to a scriptwriter that was blacklisted. She is spooning chocolate pudding into his mouth and laughing uproariously. He looks uncomfortable, but also like he really needs the pudding. This pleases me, though it is terribly hot out, but no one is in the pool. Joan Crawford is passing a cocktail to Myrna Loy, who rolls her eyes under a sun hat, while Spencer Tracy hands me a robe. I feel his depression through the terry cloth. They all look at me expectantly, like I am the savior of their union, their list maker, their dream planner, their landscaper who lost topiary shears in the wrong neighborhood. Now Clark Gable puts a palm on my waist, so basically we are engaged. But I want to be wooed by these haircuts and teeth. My tap dance starts slow, but I build momentum. I wear a bowler hat. I grow a cane from my wrist. I instantly grow a Charlie Chaplin mustache. It's real on me. When I say tap dance, I mean my rousing speech. And when I say rousing speech, I mean I lay down on a lounge chair to take a nap. I've been drugged by glamour. Let someone else manage this nut house. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Such powerful poetry. So now, Sean, we're excited to hear you.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you both for sharing your work. Hard acts to follow. And thank you for organizing this. So my book is forthcoming in May. So I don't have a cover, don't have an arc to share, but I have got old school printed pages. The name of the book is This Kind of Man. And by way of explanation, it's a cycle of short stories that attempt to take an unvarnished look at 21st century America, particularly focusing on men, and is an attempt and a creative attempt to get beyond like the front page of the newspaper, looking at why everyone seems to be so angry. And having written a great deal of fiction and poetry and nonfiction, I was not, politics was not foreign to me. And I'd written quite a bit of criticism and essays leading up to 2016. And then after 2016, I found I had more to say, but I had less interest in writing more essays critiquing America and capitalism and this toxic masculinity. So I started funneling this creativity into what became a cycle, trying to kind of give voice to older men that I don't understand. So this particular story, which is the title story, I can say with sincerity, kind of came out of nowhere. I have no idea who this person is or what he's talking about, but I'm glad I got it down. So this is the title story, This Kind of Man. The ground beef has been mixed with 2 eggs, salted and shaped. Hands thoroughly scrubbed with soap and water. I'm ready for action. Next step is going to the grocery store for the rest of the ingredients. What kind of man does this? A man with lots of time to kill. My wife was like most women. She would ensure she had everything she needed before preparing a meal. But even before our second child was born, she'd already cooked enough dinners to lose any fondness for the routine. Food became another chore, fuel which fed a family, another task to accomplish with as little effort as possible. The more time it required meant less time to do anything else, and something else always needed to be done. The bathrooms were not going to clean themselves, the dishes not put themselves away, the carpets not get miraculously vacuumed. If I didn't comprehend all this then, I do now. I could, and according to my daughter, should just hire a cleaning service. It's only me, though, and the house remains pretty manageable, at least compared to the days when 4 of us were living in it. I tell my daughter I can handle things. This isn't about the money, and it isn't. The truth is, I have too much of what my wife always wanted more of: time. My wife came to consider it an unforgivable lapse if she had to make separate trips to the store in a single week. Her shopping lists were legendary, almost scientific equations, precise and unerring. Years of trial and error led to an exact awareness of how much milk and bread and toilet paper and detergent our family used. We seldom had extra supplies, but to my knowledge, we never once ran out of anything. I can't recall ever needing a razor or a Q-tip or a tissue. There's a discipline there anyone might emulate. Not especially organized when we first got married, my wife became an expert in efficiency. Housewives from our generation learned how to balance budgets and resources in ways that should embarrass these clowns in today's government. When my wife got sick, I learned how to cook, and I hated it. Prepared food or frozen meals were fine with me. Maybe I was busy doing other things. By that point, I was doing everything, or simply took no pleasure in eating. It's difficult to enjoy familiar flavors when you live with someone who can hardly recall what they taste like. When they've reached a point where all the machinery keeping them alive has turned them into a machine. My wife once told me she envied my morning bowel movements, something I never imagined hearing one person say to another. I was a terrible cook, like most men from my generation. It should have been easier, following a formula for consistent results. Nevertheless, it took longer than I'd like to acknowledge getting comfortable in my own kitchen. Then again, I couldn't have become an accountant the same day I learned to add and subtract. Anything done with some degree of competence involves practice and a great deal of failure. I'm not sure if I enjoy cooking now so much as I appreciate having control over a process I'm able to oversee from start to finish. My son makes a good living, but he could save a lot more if he didn't eat out or order in every meal. In fairness, I would have been the same way if I'd never settled down. I'd explain this to him if we still spoke to each other, but he'll figure it out eventually. Or maybe he won't have to. We shouldn't want our children to be exactly like us, especially if it entails making the same mistakes. What kind of man doesn't speak to his son? A man whose son won't speak to him. I used to spend weeks with difficult clients, doing everything possible to convince them, and occasionally still lose the account. When I cook, I know exactly what I need, the precise time, materials, effort expected, etc. If we were able to know what was expected of us, what we should expect, I reckon most people would be perfectly content. My wife and I always joked about how I would die first. Which of my friends, I'd ask, will be the ones that flirt with you? Which ones would you consider going on a date with? Would you ever remarry? What on earth would you do with all the extra time? I never admitted it, but it was this last question that caused me the most distress. That was the one I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. What kind of man worries his wife will be at peace when he's gone? Any man who's honest, I say. Women from my generation are capable of losing sleep over a simple question. How will my husband manage living alone? Men worry that, after so much time spent serving and fretting over us, our wives would relish the autonomy that they're unaccustomed to, perhaps even regret the wasted years, the missed opportunities, etc. Thank God for religion. Without its mechanisms of control, our hospitals would become retirement homes for alcoholics. Our streets would be overrun with once highly functioning husbands who can't do anything other than work, sleep, eat, and sometimes screw. If not for religion, not to mention the self-regulating shame it imparts, it's safe to suggest my own mother, once I was out of the picture, would have been as well. Religion, money, and viable options. Without the first and with either of the other two, how many wives would stick it out? I know there must have been times when my wife saw greener grass on the other side of our marriage, and I can't blame her too much. If she'd followed through, though, she wouldn't have had a partner by her side when better turned to worse. Or maybe she would have. Maybe she would have never gotten cancer at all. We always figured I'd be the first to go. Losing your wife tends to complicate your feelings about the afterlife. If it's there, she's there, and someday, God willing, I'll be there. But so will everyone else. That means God, not to mention countless strangers, will know everything. They'll have seen all the fights, the times I wouldn't speak to her, all the lies, mostly small ones. That one time at the Christmas party that I was too drunk to remember exactly what happened anyway, etc. Her parents will have seen the way their grandson and son-in-law squared off in the garage just after their daughter's funeral, the day he finally felt he had the right to tell me all about how miserable I'd made his mother, as if he was the one wiping stains off the bathroom floor, or double washing sheets soaked with sweat and puke, or keeping track of the meds, or driving to another appointment, or sitting alone in the waiting room, bracing for bad news. Always bad news, no matter what you think you've prepared yourself to hear. What kind of man would trade places with his dying wife? Well, it's complicated. No sane person would want to suffer like that. It's difficult enough dealing with disease from mostly a safe distance. Still, once it became obvious how our story was going to end, I won't say I didn't envy her a little. We don't get to see our own funerals. We never know what everyone will say, what they really think of us. And unless there's some type of eternity, we never will. Unless we die first. Unless we have the type of death that attracts a crowd. You expect sympathy, but it's the ones who show up that tell you everything you need to know. I couldn't believe the people who came to say goodbye, not just the viewings, but those last few days. People we hadn't seen in years, people I had frankly forgotten about, people I know would never have come to see me. Who will come see me? I can count on my daughter, even though she lives in a separate time zone. I don't think my son will even be there to see me buried, much less visit my deathbed. But he'll have to live with that, just like I did, not attending my own father's funeral. And I'm pretty much at peace with it. Of course, I was relieved so many people turned out for my wife. I know it meant a great deal to her. It provided proof she was loved, that her life mattered. Most of us won't get that same opportunity. And if we do, we might not like what we discover. Even when her bones hurt, she worried about me. My bones hurt when I breathe, she said, and she still told me she worried about me. Mostly, she reminded me everything would be okay, that I deserved a break after all this, that I'd enjoy my space, that we'd never have to fight over the remote control anymore, all that kind of crap. But she really did worry. Her concern was the one thing besides her pain that I remember most clearly about those last weeks. Although I saw her give birth and breastfeed and get up in the night with sick kids and make bag lunches and wash dirty underwear and maintain every important relationship and send out birthday cards to relatives and put everyone she loved before herself, even as she lay dying, it wasn't until then that I finally understood the real difference between husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, men and women. What kind of man doesn't have some regrets? A man who's tried his best, whatever that means. A man who owns what he's done, whatever that is. I know I was there when it mattered most, and my wife said it meant everything. But did that make up for all the other things? The wasted opportunities, the forgotten slights, the countless times I could have told her something sweet, the times I made her cry, the days and nights when I wasn't there. The only promise I ever cared about keeping was the one I made to myself when I swore I wouldn't be like my old man. I saw him do things and say things and mostly not say things, but I don't think he ever entertained a moment of doubt. He checked all the boxes men of his time were supposed to. When he wasn't working, he was sleeping, or in church, or building something, or repairing something else. He was the only man I've known who didn't appear to have an imagination. I don't think he ever envisioned anything other than what he expected to happen. I couldn't forgive him for this, and now I'd give anything to experience what that feels like, especially if there's no afterlife. If it all ends, what's the point of all this wasted thought? All this useless energy convincing ourselves that anything matters. What kind of man do the neighbors or paramedics or whoever find when someone finally finds him, although as though he simply fell asleep on the same couch he'd slept on during so many forgettable TV shows, in the same suit he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral, an emptied bottle of pills he'd stolen from the hospice nurse and hidden away, without a note or phone call or farewell, a half-made meatloaf on the counter, some kind of signal or surrender. A man who hopes he's not around to ask or have to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much for some powerful pieces tonight. So we know what inspired Elisabeth's work, but Jennifer and Sean, what inspired yours? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think different things inspire me. Like, I'm definitely inspired when I travel or when I go to the museum, or I wrote that one poem on, that was inspired by the TV show Midnight Gospel, which is an older show, but it was just very creative and really well done. So I never know what's going to inspire me. Like, I'm actually writing a series of poems now that are inspired by a tarot deck and also different horror shows on TV. So, I never really know what's gonna, get into my brain, which is the great thing about writing, that I think we can agree on. So I think it's important to be open to it. And if you go to your computer or your notebook and you want to write about something and that's not coming to you, maybe don't force it and write. There's probably something in secret, that is going to show up. So that's what I try to remember that.
Yeah.
And Sean?
Yeah. So I would say that, like I said at the outset, these stories are a cycle that deal with, not entirely, but there's an abundance of kind of angry, older, and in some cases contemporary males. And I guess I'm writing out of a place, certainly not to excuse or explain things I don't understand or things that are not excusable, but I'm not satisfied with, people are angry now because there's political polarization or, everyone's woke. I think that there's a fundamental inability to connect. I think that a late capitalist model has put intolerable pressure on so many people, male, female, people in red states. And this previous generation of men, I don't think were communication and empathy were not emphasized or taught or reinforced. And I think the repercussions of that are alcohol and violence and misogyny. So again, certainly none of these stories are exonerating these behaviors, but I wanted to look deeper than yet another article of a politician going to a diner and saying, "So what are you so mad about?" And hearing the same lame excuses. So I guess I was just trying to creatively get inside, like, why is the country blowing up? And it seems worse than it's ever been. So, I just kind of had fun with that. Once you're on that, unfortunately, it's pretty easy to dig beneath the surface with your imagination.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of having fun with that. But getting to Elisabeth, a lot of your poems are really, the vulnerability is laid bare. So, how long did it take you to actually get those words on paper, and then know that they were the right words, the precise words?
Great question. I took about 20 plus years before I could approach the topic. I actually went to art school. I'm 43 now, and I went to art school, back in my 19, 20, 21. And I had an advisor who kind of knew about this experience that I had just been through. So I was there from 16 to 18 in the facilities. And she's like, "You should make work about this. You should make photography about this. You should make an installation about this." And I just remember everything in my body and my mind was just like, no. Like, I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to touch it. So it took like 20 years. So there's that. And then the actual writing process, once I did start, was about 1.5 years. I went through 8 drafts. I was very, I've actually been teaching a workshop on how I wrote it. Not that there's a particular way anyone should write a memoir about trauma, but how I wrote it, there was a very specific way that I went through and did it. So I've been trying to share that with folks in case it works for them. But yeah, I did about 8 drafts, and then Unsolicited Press picked it up after 1.5 years of submitting it. So, and then it came out 3 years later. So it's been a really long process, like almost 30 years coming up on to come out.
Yeah, I noticed that all 3 of your work actually has to deal with grief and some elements of grief. For you, it was your lost childhood. For Jennifer, that very powerful poem with the infinitive beginnings to, I don't remember all of them, but that was really a lovely poem. And then only halfway through it do you get the idea that the narrator is talking about someone who's been lost, who has died. And of course, Sean, in your story, the character is grieving not only his wife but his past, or what he did and what he didn't do, kind of grieving and swirling in regrets. So can you talk a little bit about the role of grief in, I think, the literary moods are joy, loss, fear, love, grief, and resignation. So, like, was it a conscious decision to come to the grief in that, or was it just a side dish or a side effect of the experience that, or the character that you were trying to, or just the work that just came to you? Who would like to begin?
Is that one for me?
It's true. You could start with you, but I'd like to hear from everyone.
I would too. Well, also, yeah. I mean, I with fiction, obviously, right? There needs to be a story. As I think I said before I read, there are some stories in the collection that either were inspired by real life or something I read. There's one story that deals with football concussions, and the myriad implications of young sports and stuff. This one, my dad's still alive. He's not that guy. I'm definitely not that guy. But I mean, I think as my previous generation are getting closer to the end, I've seen friends' fathers die, and imagine that what better fictional scenario than someone kind of looking at the end and trying to measure it up. And I think you put it perfectly. Like, obviously there's the immediate grief of losing a partner, but the grief of like, did I live the right way? And I think the energy of these stories is whether there's grief or rage. The implied perspective is like, there are other ways to do this. And one of them is communicating and being honest and being vulnerable. And I have a certain pity, I guess. Pity's too strong. I have a tremendous empathy for any man or woman that has been kind of culturally reinforced to keep it in and to not show vulnerability, because that is going to explode at some point.
Yeah. So Jennifer, for that particular poem that was just so poignant, you know, how did you come to the mood of grief in that poem?
Yeah, I think that grief is something we can all relate to, and loss. And I have, have friends going through various grief related situations, and that poem was inspired by one of those particular stories. And and also to kind of speak to what Sean was saying, a relationship ending or a death, a loss, we all experience pain, and it's not a competition of where that pain comes from. It's all pain that we have to move through. And I did really appreciate what you were saying, Sean, about, men of a certain generation. And I do wish that all people could feel comfortable going to therapy. I think that would just really help the whole world. So, I can really relate to what you were saying about that. And I did have a question for Elisabeth. If that's okay, I was curious about, were these facilities, were children sent there just because of general like misbehavior? Or I think I missed kind of like your introduction to like what they actually were. And so I was just curious about that.
I skipped over the what they actually were, so you didn't miss anything. So these facilities are set up to get money. They are for-profit facilities. They are 100% out to fleece parents, and they are experts at it. So the question of whether the kids, were bad or good is a good one. And none of the kids, no matter what they did, deserved what happened to us. But for sure, I would say maybe a third of the kids, this is just by my reckoning and having been in a lot of forums and read a lot of books about this stuff and part of a lot of support groups now, maybe about a third of the kids were having serious problems, with drugs or running away or living on the streets or violence or something like that. And like 2/3, and again, I'm pulling these out of my butt, these statistics, but about a third to 2/3 were just being teenagers. They smoked some pot. They were depressed. I was depressed. I had sex. God, I had sex. Like I knew a girl who was 13 when she was sent there. I was at least 16. She was 13. She got sent there because she smoked a single cigarette. She appears in one of my poems. So, you had the whole gamut of people who, there was one or two kids who were like sent there by the courts instead of to juvie. So you had a very broad range of kids who, there were kids there who hadn't even like literally, they just had like an eating disorder, but they'd never even like done anything wrong, and the staff there were not qualified whatsoever at all to care for these kids, to care for any of their needs. And I could go on and on and on. There's the biggest takeaway though, I don't know, I'm talking about something from the 90s, but these facilities exist and are thriving right now. And they're legal because they're private schools and they can kind of get away with doing anything they want. And every 5 or 10 years, they get sued out of existence, and then they pop up with like the same staff go and start their own school. There's hundreds and hundreds of them in the country. There's hundreds and hundreds out of the country. So that's the biggest takeaway to know, is that It's not some historical badness. It's right now. And you might even know someone who sent their kid to one of these places.
So Elisabeth, can you talk about the grief? Because in a way, the grief that comes through in your work is the lost childhood. I mean, the lost innocence. Um, and then after that, the lost innocence is kind of overlaid with trauma. Um, I haven't seen your whole book, but is there, can you talk about the story arc of your book? Is there, like, how does it end? How does it, well, not too much how does it end, because I don't want to give away the goodies, but is there a arc that comes to where the narrator or the speaker um, finally steps into his or her power?
No, there's not. And that was very deliberate. I wrote the book. I don't know if you recall, I was reading in the second person. So you. I wrote the book to not allow, I mean, I'm angry, and I don't want to allow the reader to walk away or be able to passively observe the events described in the book. I want them to be thrust into them and sort of forced to empathize if they are able to empathize. And I did think about, so the way the book goes is just through, I was first sent to the 6-week place, then I was sent to this place for 2.5 years, and it just goes through with little scenes from, chronologically throughout the time. And then the final section is all the nightmares that I've had over the past, when I wrote the book, 20 years. So it's a litany of nightmares. And I did receive feedback from readers that I should lead the reader to some place of hope or power. And I decided that the only concession I would make in that direction was I have a page at the end saying, if you want to learn more and if you want to do something about this, visit the following websites, read the following materials. I mean, there's so many horrifying things in the world right now. I mean, and always, and certainly mine is not, isn't necessarily the most important thing to tackle, but I wanted to leave the reader feeling uncomfortable. And I feel badly about that for people who care about me or for people who are, don't want this to exist any more than I do. But I wrote the book. Ultimately, I wanted it to get in the hands of like people who have power and who could be arrested by how I wrote it, basically, and just be like, oh God, this is horrible. I don't know if it's ever going to get to the hands of the politicians and the psychiatrists and the social workers and the people who need to read it, but that's my hope.
Well, one of the things I guess that you could do is to promote it to those people and try to get on some speaker bureaus, because art saves lives. Literature saves lives. It's a way that we either reflect the world back to the readers. I only knew about that situation because I had read about Paris Hilton's accounts of her time in it. And I kind of wondered about the parents, were they hoodwinked or were they neglectful or were they, because I would think that those places cost money to go. So, I'm not sure poor people were able to afford those kinds of schools. So maybe another book, maybe another book is in you that needs to come out somewhere, looking at different facets or nuances. But it's grief and anger. And I guess the next step would be loss because of the lost childhood that your characters experienced.
I haven't really thought about that too much. And it's funny. Yeah, you keep saying lost childhood, and I'm just like, huh, yeah. I mean, there was recently an event a prom for all of us who never got to go to prom because we were locked away. And they held it out in LA and I wasn't able to go, but there's lots of movements for trying to recover some of that lost childhood. But I will just say that when you write about trauma, you're so right. I should do these speakers bureaus and I should do conferences and I should do things. This is one of the few readings I've done. I've done like 5 readings since my book came out over a year and a half ago. They're so hard. I don't like it. And I'm just being honest. I don't like doing readings. And I mean, you all have been so supportive and lovely and everything. And, I enjoy performing poetry, and it's not that, it's just so awful, the topic. And I have trouble. I want someone else to make it circulate, not me.
Sean and Jennifer, how do you see your book? What are your hopes for your books? That's the first question. And we have 2 minutes left. So skip that question. Let's talk about writing process. What is your writing process? Like, how do you approach your work every day? Do you approach it like a job? Do you sit down and show up every day? I would like to hear from all 3 of you about what your process is.
I'll just hop in really quick, and just because I have shared custody of my children with my ex-partner, so I usually do more writing when my children are with him. It's just quieter. So, but you know what, I think I also realized I get excited if I'm working on a project. If I have a series of poems to work on that all have a similar theme, hence the chapbooks. I can get a little obsessive about a theme, and so that inspires me to keep going. So I'll say, like, find a project.
And Sean, how do you approach the writing process?
I mean, I think the serious writer's dilemma is that there's never enough time, and then if you find yourself with time, you end up cleaning the bathroom. Like, I think you just have it becomes a matter of I think we de-emphasize the physical and prioritize the mental, and it has to be a physical commitment of whether it's button share or just having access to writing and prioritizing it above, everything else. I mean, I've written a lot of different things, fortunately, in my career. And every now and then someone will ask me, meaning well, like, how did you find the time to do that? I'm like, I didn't watch a lot of TV, like there is an element of, you have to sacrifice. I don't think writing is a sacrifice, but I don't think any human that's trying to make ends meet and have meaningful relationships, the time doesn't just magically appear. So I do think you have to prioritize it. I've never found, I'm not the Stephen King, like up at 6 a.m. and I get my 5 hours or whatever. Like, I try to seize these opportunities. And then, like Jennifer was talking about, sometimes when you're writing a poem or a story or a longer project, you get wrapped up in that, and the momentum kind of carries you along.
Mm-hmm. And Elisabeth?
Yeah, I still haven't cracked the whole steady writing process thing. I do it in spurts. I do it in obsessive spurts, and I also do really well. I write a lot of stuff when I'm supposed to be doing something else. So like, it's like this rebellious act. So when I'm the most busy is usually when I'm like secretly writing some poetry.
Yay.
Yes. Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing your work with us tonight. I'd like to remind our audience to smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you will know and get a notification for our next reading, which is February 21st. I would also like to say that all of the books are available on Unsolicited Press's website, either under pre-order or under already published. So head over to Unsolicited Press and buy some books, especially if these writers have interested you and piqued your interest in their characters and their work. And with this, we're going to say thank you to everyone who watched us tonight, and good night. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.